Hello, my name is Sterling Crew, and it's my great pleasure today to talk to Selvarani Elahi, MBE, who is the Deputy Government Chemist for the UK. Selvarani does so much work to help protect food safety and food authenticity in this country, and we're going to be talking about eggs and food fraud and also the Food Authenticity Network as well. Selvarani, welcome.
Thank you, Sterling. Nice to be here.
Selvarani, perhaps you could start by telling us about the laboratory of the Government Chemist and what is the role of the Government Chemist?
So the Laboratory of the Government Chemist was founded in 1842 as a government laboratory for analysing tobacco imports for excising the right amount of duty. It then very quickly grew into a laboratory that did food, environment, and all the other things that we do today.
So Selvarani, perhaps you could tell us about the two main functions of the Government Chemist?
Yeah, so there are two specific functions. One where the government chemist acts as an independent referee analyst in cases of dispute between food business operators and regulators. And this is in response to a list of legislation that's specified where we can act as the referee. And this independent technical arbitration is something that's highly regarded by both the food industry and by regulators because it gives that technical independent arbitration that doesn't really exist anywhere else in Europe. It's pretty unique and pretty rare elsewhere in the world too. Then the second part of the government chemist function is an advisory role where we advise on any measurement science implications of either existing legislation or future legislation standards or policy. And a big part of this is where our staff sit on national and international standardization committees to make sure that measurements and standards are standardized across the UK, Europe and globally, so that measurements made in the UK are comparable to those made in Shanghai, Seattle and Sydney.
And you've been such an important part of that, and you've been recognised recently with an MBE, so congratulations with that, Selvarani.
Thank you very much. So the current government chemist, I should say, is Dr. Julian Braybrook, but I am incredibly proud to be the first female deputy government chemist since this role has existed. So I'm very honoured to be that.
And a great job you're doing as well. So part of your role is also that you are director of the Food Authenticity Network, which is related to the government chemist role. And talk about being local and international. FAN is exactly that. Perhaps you could describe what the Food Authenticity Network is and your role in it and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sterling is the chair of our advisory board and we have an international advisory board that advises the work of FAN, which we're very grateful for, Sterling. So thank you for that. So FAN was set up in 2015, as you know, in the wake of the global horse meat incident where horse meat was illegally substituted into beef meat products. And DEFRA put out an invitation to tender, LGC applied, and we were awarded the contract. And we were set up as a result of the Elliott Review recommendations, which is now Professor Chris Elliott from Queen's University's recommendations. And it was primarily, excuse me, to focus UK efforts around standardisation of methods for food authenticity testing. But soon after launching, which was in July 2015, we realised that although people like me get very excited about testing, actually a lot of people just want to prevent the food fraud from happening in the first place. So in December of 2015, we set up our free food fraud prevention pages, which is probably our most visited pages now. And at the heart of it, FAN is an open access platform that curates global information on best practices or good practices around food authenticity testing, but also food fraud prevention. So we signpost to many other global tools, some of which are free, some of which are paid for, so that can help businesses implement food fraud prevention strategies because, you know, food fraud is global. It doesn't respect any borders or boundaries. So it's really important that we share this information for any stakeholder to access because we realise that not every country has sophisticated food fraud prevention strategies or authenticity programs like the UK has had the privilege of having. So we have a lot of experience that we can put out there for the benefit of everyone in the world. And I think a key aspect of this is also providing free open access resources is that we know that over 97% of UK food manufacturing businesses are actually SMEs. And I think this is reflected all over the world. So although the bigger organisations that have the funds and that are international have very good prevention strategies. It's their suppliers, and we are all at the mercy of those suppliers that are all over the world, but they don't often have big resources, and they have to tackle both food safety, food quality and authenticity. It can be a huge challenge for them. So I think giving them the right tools and enabling them to be able to comply is a big part and responsibility for all of us.
I suppose we should talk about the British Lions scheme and what a great scheme that is. Personally, I think it is the most effective safety scheme that we have in this country and is the envy of people globally whenever I travel. But most people look at the scheme and think, oh, it's terrific because it has almost just eliminated salmonella out of the food chain. Certainly in the UK, and you can remember as I in the 80s how bad salmonella was. And the scheme has eliminated that, not necessarily abroad. We still have some imports that can be quite challenging. But when people talk about the scheme, they talk about salmonella. What they don't realise is that actually it covers chemicals as well, chemical safety as well as microbiological safety. So we've seen things like fipronil and dioxin. What's your view on the way that it can control chemical contamination and protect consumers?
Well, it's a great scheme because, as you say, it covers both chemical and microbiological safety and also traceability back to the farm. So a real consumer-facing label, really, that shows us trust in the system. And obviously with third-party assurance schemes, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantees in life. It doesn't mean that nothing can go wrong. And I think that's a misconception from people thinking that you can never have an incident where something is certified. It's not true, but the certification does provide independent verification that the production processes follow a system and a standard, usually an internationally accepted standard. So in the case of eggs, it could be organic certification or, free range. Whatever that certification is, it proves that the company has got the right procedures, usually best practice and international standards, and that they're adhering to that. So it provides assurance both to business assurance. So if you're selling on to a retailer, that they can be assured that you've got those procedures in place. But also it's really reassuring, I think, for consumers, and this is such a strong brand because we see it on most of our eggs in the UK, that they can have trust in that system. And the trust is really generated by the fact that there are certified inspectors that have nothing to do with the business or any part of that egg supply chain that go in, audit the farms, the supply chains, the records to give that assurance. And also if the standards are not up to scratch, that certification can be taken away. So people have to work very hard to keep that certification and make sure that they follow these accepted standards, both nationally and usually the international standards.
The food fraud as well, isn't it? That's so important to you. It's an indicator that the systems are in place to prevent food fraud when it comes to eggs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think earlier cases this year, we've seen food fraud cases. So prosecutions from the result of the Animal Plant Health Agency, APHA, inspectors inspecting premises and finding that there were relabeling or reboxing of eggs to imply that they were a higher standard than they actually were, or prolonging sell-by dates or extending them, which obviously can have food safety implications for consumers.
To be clear, these prosecutions don't involve British Lion egg producers, and there are strict procedures in place to monitor lion standards.
So some quite serious implications, and there were successful prosecutions and companies got fined. However, when you look at the sentences and the fines associated with them, and this is often the case, unfortunately, with food fraud, that the sentences and fines are not very big. And this doesn't act as a deterrent for food fraud, whereas in other countries and cases there are more severe penalties. And in the melamine, I'm not saying that we should adopt this, but there were some very serious implications in China. So unfortunately for food fraud, it's not a deterrent because if you're only going to get a slap on the wrist and a few £1,000s, this doesn't really deter criminals. And it's something I think prosecutors and lawmakers are conscious of. And since horse meat, it has got better. The fines are getting increasingly more severe. And I think, yes, if people are making thousands or millions from food fraud, when they're caught, there should be more severe penalties to try and act as a deterrent.
Because a lot of these food fraud cases actually have a food safety implication, is that right?
Absolutely. I think often food fraud is just dismissed as a consumer choice issue. So what if you've paid, 10p more for your product and it's not quite what you think? But actually, when you've got criminals and fraudsters acting in the supply chain, they're not going to choose the most choice ingredients to adulterate your food with or to commit the food fraud with. They'll just choose whatever suits them so they can extend the product. They're motivated by economic gain, by nothing else. So often there are food safety implications, and actually 3 of the 4 largest food fraud incidents, global incidents in the last 20 years have had food safety implications. So I don't think you can ever dismiss food fraud as just being a consumer choice issue. Often the two go together because it will be waste product or something else that's diverted back into the food supply chain. So there can, on occasion, be very severe food safety implications from food fraud cases.
And I suppose food fraudsters might be attractive to the egg sector because British Lion eggs are slightly more expensive to guarantee that safety and give people that assurance. Food fraudsters, especially when egg production in this country is struggling to keep up with consumer demand, that's when food fraudsters, I presume, move in when they see, there's a bigger demand there. And is there a way we can disguise a product that it's British Lion egg and missell it and make some money?
Yeah, unfortunately, this happens with premium brands, and often when you look at food fraud cases in the past, fraudsters either target premium brands where they can command a higher price for something that's not the same quality, or things that are consumed in high volume. So if you look at global food fraud reported incidences, it's either those like olive oil, wine, spirits that command a higher price, or things like dairy, meat and fish that are sometimes can be premium brands, but actually like things like milk are just consumed in such high quantity that if you just have a few pence in there, that makes a difference. It's the volume that actually makes the revenue for the fraudsters. So that's an important consideration. Also, at the moment, tariffs and also food inflation is a big driver for potential food fraud. And earlier this year, there was reported cases that US inspectors were seizing more eggs than the opioid fentanyl because of the price surge in the States, where a box of eggs was reportedly up to $15 in the US, but south of the border, they were still being traded for $2. So you can see that's a big price differential. And if you're motivated for that, they've seen it, a 36% increase in egg smuggling across the US, but actually at border regions it was much, much higher than that.
There are various traceability procedures in place with the Lion scheme, including Lion Egg Farm's website, which allows you to check where your eggs come from. You just need to enter the code printed on the egg and it will tell you whether it's a British Lion egg. And there are incidents of this. We know that there are eggs coming in through Europe that are evading imported food controls and being sold in this country, which don't have the same assurance schemes attached to them. And the consumers sometimes don't know that. I presume if you're in a restaurant and you've ordered a scrambled egg, you wouldn't know what that egg is for unless you ask somebody, and then even then you would be taking the person's word for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Catering and hospitality are completely different because usually you don't have that consumer-facing labelling. You're just trusting what's on the menu, and it's the business-to-business assurance that you need then. And probably the suppliers are being supplied eggs that they think are British Lion, but they might not be. And that happens across all other commodities as well. And also, if you've got in-shell eggs, the traceability is a bit easier because you can have the date stamping and all the paperwork that goes with that. But as soon as the eggs are cracked and it becomes a liquid product, it's much harder then to prove the traceability of that product. But you'll often find that, again, that's not just for eggs, it's things like honey, it's minced meat, and the horse meat incident that we referred to actually happened in minced meat processed products, not in sirloin steaks, which I think butchers can tell what's authentic and what it isn't. But when products are offered to consumers either in a blended or comminuted form, there's much more potential then for food fraud because it's easier to sneak something else in that's not of the same quality.
And processed eggs are so popular now. It's like when I was younger, I couldn't remember seeing them at all. But you're right, if you go into catering, people very rarely get on shell eggs, and that they get these type of liquid eggs which have been sold to consumers and arrive in big boxes to your local restaurant or hospitality. And although most of them will still go through the British Lion scheme, there are some producers with pasteurised liquid eggs who don't use British Lion, and you can, I presume, have the same consequences of there if it was chemically contaminated. you wouldn't know. And certainly there was a micro issue with salmonella, you wouldn't know either.
No, and I think, as soon as something is out of its main form, I think the shell actually provides a lot of protection in nature. That's the way it was designed to. So when you take it out of there are all sorts of other issues that you expose the contents to. My niece is a baker. She runs a bakery business, and I know that's the first time I think I saw liquid egg. I didn't know it was a thing. But a lot of people that are in the baking and catering industry rely on this sort of product to make their goods.
And I suppose that's where you said traceability is so important for the person buying the product.
Yeah, I think both from a consumer point of view, but a business-to-business point of view as well. And I think having assurance schemes and marks that are very recognisable by consumers is very powerful. And I think that's where British Lion Eggs have managed to do that. I think also as a consumer, we know when we shop that you'd like to think that you want to read every label. And I work in food testing, but I think the last data I heard about it is that a consumer on average looks at a label for about 3 seconds, and often by on habit. So you just throw things into your basket, rush out and get on with your day. So actually, and also there are so many labels now and different marks on packaging that it's actually quite confusing. But I think for eggs, this is a very recognisable brand that speaks to consumers directly and does engender trust in this scheme. So I think that's successful from that point of view. That's what you want in an assurance scheme, and that's what people are trying to achieve.
Especially if you're one of those vulnerable groups, if you're very old or very young, or you have some underlying health condition that might put you at greater risk. I mean, it's really important you have confidence in the food that you're eating.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the Food Standards Agency has recognised that British Lion eggs can be eaten by those vulnerable groups, and it's not often that they would go out and say that, so that again gives assurance in that sort of brand, and because they know that there's procedures behind it and they know what the certification is involved with British Lion Eggs, so I think they're able to make that sort of statement.
Can I ask you, as a chemist, and a very well-respected chemist, about fipronil and dioxin, the two big cases we had of chemical contamination in Europe, and that had a massive impact into one of the biggest recalls ever in European history when it came to eggs, and people wouldn't have thought that that was a problem because it impacted us. Even though this happened across the channel, a lot of those eggs were actually exported. I think they were processed eggs as well, and they'd ended up in ready meals and sandwiches and things like that, and it impacted this country, and a lot of very kind of high-end retailers were caught in this.
Yeah, I think eggs and milk are those things that are ubiquitous, aren't they? In so many processed products now, you don't actually realise. So until you're with somebody who's who's either vegetarian or they're dairy intolerant, and you look at a lot of the ingredients, and they can't eat many of the processed products. So I think for these sorts of ubiquitous products, it's the impact is much greater than you would visualise. People would just say, oh, it's just the eggs or just milk, but no, it goes into so many products, so it's really important.
That's a very important point to make. Most of us think egg and we think on shell eggs, don't we? Normal eggs. We don't think how it's being used elsewhere. So could you comment on either of those, where it came from and what the risk is?
Yeah, so fipronil, now we know that everyone's done the analysis on it. It was called by fraudulent activity. So fraudsters mixed in a banned insecticide into a legal cleaning product and presented it as a legal cleaning product to poultry farms to prevent the occurrence of mites. So it was used liberally and unfortunately contaminated millions of eggs. And I still remember the pictures and all the headlines of millions and millions of eggs being destroyed. And obviously, along with that, livelihoods of farmers and a lot of retailers suffered losses too. So I think this is where fraudsters look for opportunities like this, and we have to be vigilant. But it may have happened just on some farms, but I think because of the weak not necessarily enforcement, but just vigilance around it spread all across Europe. So it was recalls in 40 different European countries and had a devastating impact on the egg industry. And always in such cases like this, there's a consequent loss of confidence from consumers in egg safety and the regulatory regimes around that. So obviously since that incident, things have stepped up and regulators and inspections have been increased to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again. And again, with dioxin as an earlier incidence, but a much more severe potential health hazard to human beings on the basis that dioxins are organic pollutants and persistent pollutants at high exposure can cause cancer, reproductive and immune system changes. Although in both cases, I should say that the risk assessments for consumption from eggs was low because of the concentrations found, the long-term exposure from dioxins are much more severe. And I think the latest on the dioxin issues that I've read about say that it's not necessarily fraudulent activity, but actually it was just poor practice where, dioxin contaminated fats, industrial fats, were not properly segregated from food grade fats, and they were mixed into animal feed and unfortunately contaminated eggs, poultry and pork products, again causing devastating impacts for the industry, but both on a national level but on a trade level as well. So where our eggs and products were banned, and so not good, and really severe consequences for consumer confidence in eggs and poultry and pork at that time.
And it's a marvellous resource. Not just that, I think it's a one-stop shop. So if you need to do anything, it's signposted and it gives you all the information you need, and it's free. And we've got a QR code going up at the end of this so people can join straight away. Takes, 2-3 minutes?
Less than a minute, 6 questions, really, really easy. And it's a no-brainer. I think if you are in the food fraud prevention business, it's something that's really valuable. On a monthly basis, if you sign up for membership, you get our monthly bulletin, which acts as a really good horizon scanning tool for food fraud prevention or food fraud incidents and any new testing methods that have come online since the last month. So a valuable resource, I would recommend it.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Selvarani. That's some great insight there into the work you do as the government chemist and all the work they do, all the work you do on food fraud. And just to remind people, you'll see the QR code coming up in a second, so you can have the benefit of joining FAN and tap into your experience especially. Thank you so much, and I've learnt a lot today. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you so much, Sterling. Thanks for having me.